Hey, Charles Hoffman here from iZotope. Today we're looking at 7 essential EQ tips used by professional artists, mixers, and mastering engineers. These tips will help you sculpt the tone of your recordings, unmask elements in your mix, balance your tracks, and more. The AI-powered plugins in this video feature Neutron, which is intended for mixing, and Ozone, which is meant for mastering. You can download a free trial of both these plugins in the description below. You'll also find links to videos that teach you how to use these AI plugins in detail. Alright, let's get into it.
Then we have this bit of EQ. Look at the filter. What do you guys observe? I'm lopping out a lot of low end and I'm lopping off a lot of top end. The low end, we've done this before, right? And we are keeping some room for the kick. We're also keeping some room for the bass. But what about the top end? This I learned from producer Dave Fortman, who did a lot of the Evanescence stuff. Back in the day, I was assisting some mixes that Dave was doing, and I remember at the end of the day going to see his guitar EQ, and I remember all of these filters were put in doing this very thing. And when I took them out, the guitars were giganormous and huge, and I thought, why doesn't Dave prefer the bigger sound rather than this small contained sound? And when I asked, Dave, basically to paraphrase, said, distorted guitars, think of them as white noise. They just want to take over the world. They want to dominate. So these filters are helping me keep the low end tidy, but also the top end, right? The cymbals, the articulation of the vocals, until you find the sweet spot where they're popping out, they sound aggressive, but they don't eat the rest of the stuff. So here, listen to the before and after. One more time, listen to the clarity of the bass and the clarity of the cymbals when this is in. There you go. Of course, if you do the before and after, it sounds not as big, but nobody's going to have access to the before. So my question is, without seeing all this stuff, does it rock? Yes, it does. It sounds good. It sounds great. It rocks.
There's an interesting part of this song where they added this water effect. And later on, when I play the whole song, you'll see that they're referencing drowning. So they wanted to kind of make a real live metaphor out of it. I created these filters on all the subgroups. So we got bass, drums, music, and then the kick also. Oops. As you can see, that's when it's going to activate. So I put a high filter or low pass filter on them so that it'll simulate the feeling of being underwater. And then here I have it ramping back up, the whole beat in general. I have it cut here and then ramping back up. I think every song should have dynamics, and anytime I feel like I can add that to the song, I'm just going to try it, because the worst thing the artist will say is that they don't like it and we can revert back, you know? Like, there's no pride involved in it. I don't need to make my mark, but if I find something that can make the song better, I'm going to at least try it. Cool.
I'm going to bypass this again, and when I put it back in, just refresh your memory on, is it sounding better? Is it sounding worse? It's more aggressive, which I really like. but it also has this kind of nasal thing that I really dislike. So here, of course, I have already pre-prepared how to make it better. Let me exemplify. I'm going to make a copy of Neutron, and I'm going to bypass a safety, and I'm going to go for this one. So here, I already know that there is a lot of 800 hertz that I do not want to hear. I'm going to go put this back to 0. And I want you, yes, you, to try to hear in your mind's ear what's not awesome about it. And we know that it's that nasal thing, right? I'm going to grab any old filter like this one, and I will make an educated guess that it's going to be at 1,000 hertz, so at 1K. And I'm going to boost it a lot. And that boosting a lot is going to be me trying to match the sound in my head that I do not like with my educated guess by exaggerating a lot. When I do, does it sound higher, lower, or right on the money? I'm going to very quickly move it until it matches that memory of that sound, and then that's the very frequency we're going to take out. So once again, I'm going to hit play. You're going to hear what is lame about this. You're going to exaggerate a frequency until you find that, and then that's the very thing we're going to take out. Here we go. It sounds higher than the nasal sound that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to very quickly do this again, but I'm going to move until I go, no, it's that. That's the sound that I don't want. That's awful. And that's exactly the thing that I want to take out. So I'm going to put that back to 0, and let's go see if the kick drum clears out. Way better. I'm taking my time here just to show you guys a concept of you add two instruments together, you're listening to how that second one is affecting the first one, you try to find that sound in your mind's ear, you exaggerate it a lot. Once you find it, that's the very thing you're going to take out. And that is an approach that I want to encourage you to take when you try to unmask sounds.
So yeah, once I got the drums feeling good, I would listen back and make sure that I'm really getting that pronunciation of the kick, because the kick is 4 on the floor for most of the song, and it has to feel like it's our anchor, you know?
Yeah.
So you can see I've put Neutron on one of the snares here. So this is the more kind of crunchy top-end snare. I really like to layer snares and have some of them be the kind of sizzle, some of them be the chunky kind of, you know, in the chest,
body, yeah.
the body, exactly. So I'd say this is the kind of sizzle snare, and see I've scooped out all the bottom end. I'll go back to the chorus drums now. I have a live drum that's playing along with the program drums,
Cool.
Giving it a bit of room, a live room sound of just like a kit playing along can give some air to everything. So that's just giving us like the cymbals are in a room and the hi-hats. The hats I found were just kind of piercing a little hard. So again, I've used Neutron here to just scoop off a little bit of that, you know, make sure that they're not too piercing, because when I listen back to the first mix, because I'm working off the original mix done by John Congleton, which is hard because John's a great mixer. And so to try and improve on that, I was like, oh gosh, although the hats are an important driving force in the song, I want it to be about the snare, you know? So the drums are feeling good, and now I want to make sure that my bass is really knocking against the drums. This is the foundation of the song. So we've got 2 basses running, 2 synth basses. The first one is, again, kind of like the snare, like the sizzle part of the bass. I really want a lot of like aggression, distortion out of it. Then the one below it is the more subby version of the bass. So I think it's actually the same synth bass octave down and just providing that sort of chest frequency. So it's coming through pretty strong and we're not losing the snare. If we turn on the sub bass now, you can feel that it's not going to do too much, but it's just going to give you something that you can feel in your chest rather than hear necessarily. So one of the cool things about the Neutron plugin I found is that it really helps you with that issue of masking that we've talked about, where sometimes something is getting lost and you need to find the frequency that's actually muddying the foundation and pull it out. So with that sub bass, it was getting a little out of control at times, and sometimes it was actually so bassy that it was making other things in the mix dull, you know what I mean? So through a bit of trial and error, found that around 380 hertz is where it was getting a little complex. So you can see I've just dragged that down to get rid of that frequency altogether. So on the other sub bass, or synth bass we'll say, I've actually left that frequency. It's now being pulled up because I want more out of that synth bass.
Here I have an instance of Neutron. Here in the EQ, this curve, which looks kind of weird. We already have the lowest of lows are our kick drums. So the first filter is a little bit of house cleaning, telling my bass, yo, you got to move over to the next available sliver, which is away from 65 hertz. Then I'm also adding a little bit of a peak resonance at 72. So right where it cuts off there, I'm adding a little bit more low end so that at that first available little sliver of frequency that it has, it can pop out of there and own it. This -3, I'm unmasking the kick. This is a lot of talking. Let's go and listen because Neutron is awesome. I have this track 15 edit set to be in my masking module. And what is track 15? It's this kick drum sample here. So you see in orange, that's that kick drum. And you see that there's a lot of energy where this filter at 150 is at. So if I put these two together now, look what happens when I pop the EQ in. Don't even listen to the bass. Listen to how the EQ is giving clarity to the kick drum. I'm going to mute the bass actually, and I want you to hear the kick drum. Then I'm going to put the bass in and do not listen to the bass. Listen to how the sound of the kick drum changes. It feels like a little bit of clarity in the kick drum, just a little bit. It just feels like it's not as punchy and full as before. So now with this EQ, we're trying to gain some of that clarity from this bass. Here we go. Yes, we did. We need a little bit more low end. So perhaps this guy right here, this resonant peak, I'm going to up that a little bit to gain a little bit more perception of warmth. Considerably better. Do not miss out on this step, as this is part of the art of mixing.
The first thing I do is in this case, we're going to open Ozone 10. I've got my equalizer, which is currently in stereo, but I will switch it to mid-side at one point. Using it in mid-side is what allows me to maybe isolate the vocal or isolate the snare or the kick, and to try and affect those parts of the song without having a significant impact on the rest of the track. Typically, I've always got a high shelf between 15 and 16K, which sounds really high, but it's not adding like a ton of stuff, but it will just give an extra sparkle to the song. When it comes to high-end EQ changes, I almost always make those in stereo. That's one of the exceptions. That's why I start with this plugin in stereo. I don't want to change something in the sparkle in the center and not on the sides, because it's going to make the song sound weird. So in this song, what I'm going to do here is around 15K. I'm just going to add a half a dB. After that, I'm going to switch to mid-side because I want to concentrate on the vocal. So that's what I'm going to listen for now. And the nice thing about this EQ is that you can solo the band and just kind of move the frequencies around, and you can listen and kind of decide which particular aspect of the vocal you want to be treating. Typically, my Q will be really small, like maybe 1.1 is the tightest Q I will get. I also don't typically ever make huge gain changes and adjustments, but for visual purposes here, I'll show you. Just randomly, I chose 5 so that you can see the shape of the curve is really wide, and it's going to be making overarching changes. A tighter Q would affect, a very small portion of the frequency range, but in mastering, it sounds weird. Don't do it. For me, something that will be a very tight, specific decision, that'll be a Q of like 1.1 or 1.2. That's as thin as I get. And so I'm typically, I hang out at around 0.8. I'm also never making a 5 dB gain on anything. I don't think you'll ever see me use more than a dB and a half or 2 dB of EQ on anything. More than that, not only does it typically make the song sound strange, but it won't give you the effect that you're going for. So if 2 dB of EQ isn't making the change that you want to make, then you shouldn't be using EQ to make that change. It either needs to be a mix adjustment or you need to use a different tool. So I'm just going to listen again to the vocal and kind of decide. Together we find salvation. It's just around the corner. It's just around the corner. It's an invitation to a new world order. Okay, I also want to add a little bit of sparkle to the vocals. I'm going to go back to stereo to do that. I'm going to do that around 5K. That's going to be my crazy tight Q of 1. And I'm going to listen to that. That's going to be on both the vocals and the sides. So it's going to affect the background vocals too, and any sort of like cymbal-y sounds as well. So it's something you should be careful about. If you accentuate it too much, then you might get something tinny or harsh. Together we find salvation of borders. It's just around the corner. It's just around the corner. And if at any point I start to lose perspective on my volume, I'm just going to go back and check. There's no rule that says you can't. My heart is done. My heart is my story of separation. We're together we find salvation. Love with no borders.
Now, you'll notice that we're already parked here on some work that I was doing, which involves processing transient and or sustained information in the signal. This is a brand new feature in Ozone 11 in the EQ and other modules as well. And to get where I got, all you have to do is go to the drop-down menu in the center. It'll look something like this when you open the plugin up for the first time, and click to find transient, sustain. And it's worth mentioning, you can also affect the mid or the side, left and right, and transient, sustain, or just work in stereo if that's what you want to do. So I'm going to go back here to transient and sustain. And what I can do is first hear the portions of the transient or sustained elements of this guitar track, and then get to work enhancing or curtailing aspects of those two said portions of the signal. So first of all, we could just listen to the transient information in this guitar track by going to the solo button here and listening. I can do the same thing for sustain. And here's everything all together. So let's say that what I wanted to do was bring out some of the warmth of this guitar by amplifying some of the sustain information. To do that, I'm going to make sure that I do what I just did, which is click to make sure that this gray circle is around the sustain word, as opposed to it being around the transient word. If we're in the transient mode of processing, this will have a gray outline behind it, and the sustain will be not affected. So let's make sure we click that. Now we are working with the sustained elements of this track. So now what I'll do is just do a little bit of EQ work and maybe draw out some of the low-end information where I think some of the sustain is happening, predominantly in this acoustic guitar track. But if I'm not sure, you can always option and click to solo around the signal and make sure that your processing will be super localized to the things that you want. So in this case, like I said, my hunch is there's some sustained information happening here in the lows and low mids. I'm going to use the option click to really investigate to make sure that I can target my processing appropriately. So I pretty much confirmed what I was hearing. So now with sustain engaged, I will make a little boost here. One more thing that I can do is make sure that I'm really processing the low end and drawing out the sustained information in this guitar track by hitting the delta button. What delta is going to do is essentially perform a null test so that I can hear the focus of the processing in the EQ. So when I press this, I'm going to hear just the difference between the before and after, so where my processing is being localized to. So that lets me know that I'm really drawing out the low-end sustained information. Let's do a before and after with the bypass button. Now, obviously that sounds like what I want it to. We've drawn out the sustained portion in the low end, but it also sounds a bit louder. And how can I be sure if my moves sound better if they just sound louder? Because we're often fooled into thinking that louder sounds better. So to take loudness out of the equation, I can press the gain match feature, and now it'll match the before and after loudness wise so that all we hear is the result of our sustained processing. So if when I'm in gain match mode, I find that I actually need a bit more juice, I don't have to go back to this node here to boost things up. I can actually use the amount over here option to scale things a little bit more extreme or a little bit more conservative, or all the way down here to 0. So we can experiment with that with gain match on, of course. I'm definitely getting that woodiness from the guitar, which works for me because I think this track might work really well in a ballad, and I want that guitar to be spotlit. So I don't want to shave too much low end off of it. I want it to be, front and center. And I've drawn out a lot of the warm tones that are sustained using the new Transient sustain processing here.
If you liked what you heard, make sure to download a free trial of Neutron and Ozone in the description below. Leave a comment with your favorite tip from the video, or add one of your own. Also, make sure to subscribe to the iZotope YouTube channel for more tips like this, and like the video if it helped you out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.